The voice on the static. Part 1: The Dead Air. The silence on the CB radio is a strange thing. It's not a peaceful quiet, but a tense, watchful one. On a long haul through the vast, empty landscapes of the Great Plains, my CB is my lifeline. It's a constant stream of chatter, a connection to other drivers, a chorus of voices that reminds me I'm not alone out here. But that night, the CB was dead. Not static, not crackle, just silence. Mile after mile, nothing. It was the kind of quiet that crawls under your skin and makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up. My rig was an old Freightliner, a trusted companion with 1,000,000 miles on the odometer. It had a comforting, familiar rumble, a rhythm that was my constant companion. But that night, even the rumble seemed a little off, a little too quiet. I was somewhere between Kansas and Oklahoma, a straight, flat stretch of highway with a sky so black it felt like a heavy blanket. The moon was just a sliver of light, and the stars were pinpricks in the vast, inky darkness. I kept trying to hail anyone, anything on the CB, but all I got was dead air. It was like I was the only person left on the planet. I tried changing the channel, but it was the same everywhere. Just silence. It was unnerving. I was an experienced driver, I'd seen it all. But I'd never felt so completely, utterly alone. The silence wasn't just the absence of sound, it was a presence. It felt like something was listening, waiting for me to say something, to break the quiet. I decided to pull over at a small, abandoned truck stop I knew about. It was just a gravel lot with a rusted gas pump and a collapsing shed. But it was off the road, and I could get some rest. As I eased the rig into the lot and cut the engine, the silence became absolute. It was so complete it was a physical thing, a pressure against my eardrums. I was just about to crawl into the bunk when a faint, almost inaudible sound came from the CB. It was a whisper. It wasn't a human voice. It was a sound like dry leaves rustling in the wind, but it was coming from the radio. I sat up, my heart pounding in my chest, and listened. The whisper was a single, repeated word. Lost, lost, lost. My hand trembled as I reached for the mic. I knew I shouldn't answer, but the curiosity was a strong, undeniable pull. I had to know what was on the other end of that static. I picked up the mic, my voice a shaky whisper in the overwhelming silence. Hello? Is anyone there? The whispering stopped. A tense, suffocating quiet filled the cab. And then a new sound came through the CB. It was a wet, gurgling sound, a low, choked gasp, as if someone was drowning. And then a voice, thin and raspy, a woman's voice, came through the radio. Don't go to the next town, she whispered, the words broken by that horrible, gurgling sound. Don't go to the diner. The line went dead. The gurgling stopped, replaced by a low, humming static. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely put the mic back in its cradle. I was utterly terrified. This wasn't a prank. This was a warning. And whatever was on the other end was not of this world. Part 2: The Eerie Invitation. The silence after the call was a new kind of terror. The CB was dead again, its receiver lying in its cradle like a harmless piece of plastic. But I knew better. The wet, gurgling sound and the broken whisper were still ringing in my ears. My heart was pounding, a frantic drum against my ribs. I tried to calm myself down. It had to be a hallucination, a trick of the mind. Maybe I just dreamed it all. But the cold dread that had settled in my stomach was as real as the steering wheel under my hands. I picked up my phone, my old flip phone that barely got a signal out here, and tried to Google the next town. All I got was an old, out-of-date page from a local chamber of commerce. It mentioned a diner on the outskirts of town, a place called the Crossroads Cafe. No mention of any tragedy. No mention of anything out of the ordinary. Just an old, faded picture of a brick building with a neon sign. But the voice on the CB had been specific. Don't go to the diner. My gut was screaming at me to listen to the warning. Just turn around. Take the long way. But the dispatcher was expecting me. My delivery was time-sensitive. A detour would cost me an entire day, and I would miss my deadline. Every logical fiber of my being told me to ignore the ghostly call and just push through. But every illogical, terrified part of me was telling me to listen. The voice had known where I was. It had known my route. How could it have known that? A cold, rational fear began to creep in. This wasn't just a random message. It was personal. It was a warning meant specifically for me. I gripped the steering wheel and took a deep breath. I had to know. I had to see. I had to find out what was at that diner. Was it just a harmless place, and I was just being paranoid? Or was it something more? I put the truck in gear and pulled back onto the road. The moon had gone behind a cloud, and the night was even darker now. The air felt heavy, oppressive, as if it were watching me, waiting for me to make a mistake. As I drove, I kept glancing at the old CB, half expecting it to come to life again. But it was silent. The only sound was the low drone of my engine. I was halfway to the town when a low, almost inaudible whisper began to fill the cab. It wasn't coming from the radio. It was coming from everywhere. It was a faint sound, like a dry leaf skittering across the floor. "Turn back," it hissed. "Turn back." I sped up, trying to drown out the sound with the engine. But the whisper grew louder, more insistent. It started to sound like multiple voices, whispering in unison, a chorus of dry, rustling sounds. He knows you're coming, he's waiting." I put my hands over my ears, but the whispers were in my head now. They were inside my skull. I was losing my mind. I was going crazy. I wasn't even 10 miles from the town when the whispers stopped. A dead, suffocating silence took their place. I looked ahead, and I saw a glow on the horizon. The lights of the town. My stomach tightened into a knot. I wanted to stop, to turn around. But I had to know. I had to see. The trucker in me, the part that was stubborn and refused to back down from a challenge, took over. I pushed on. Part 3. The Price of Disobedience. The whispers returned, but they were no longer a chorus of voices. It was a single, cold, malicious hiss that came from inside the cab, so close it felt like someone was sitting right beside me. "You didn't listen," the voice whispered. "You came anyway." The voice was filled with triumph and dark amusement, a predator that had finally caught its prey. My mind went blank. All I could feel was pure, gut-wrenching dread. "You should have stayed on the road," the voice whispered. "You should have listened to the first warning. Now, you get to see." The voice turned into a low, terrifying laugh, a sound that had no humor, only malice. A cold, palpable dread filled the cab, so thick I could feel it on my skin. The lights in the truck flickered. The radio turned on, blasting white noise at full volume. The doors automatically locked, then unlocked, over and over again. The windows rolled down, and a frigid blast of wind and dust rushed into the cab. I screamed, fumbling for the receiver, to hang up, to drop the bone-like piece of plastic. But I couldn't. My hand was stuck. The phone was a part of me now. And the man's voice whispered again, closer this time, as if he were sitting in the passenger seat beside me. "Look," he hissed. "Look at the window." My eyes were frozen, staring out at the diner. Through the flickering light of the neon sign, I could see them. Inside the windows. They were shadowy figures, their bodies thin and spectral. I could see them moving inside the diner, sitting at the tables, standing by the counter. They were just blurry shapes at first, but then they began to take form. A woman was sitting at a booth, her head tilted to the side at a grotesque angle. A man stood by the counter, his chest covered in a dark, wet stain. They were all there. The people from the faded photos on the wall. They were all dead. And then they turned to look at me. Their faces were hollowed out, their eyes two empty black pits of despair and hatred. And they began to bang on the windows. Not a physical banging, but a sound that was a mix of a ghostly shriek and a desperate plea. A sound that rattled in my mind, not in the air. "You brought him to us," A spectral voice shrieked, seeming to come from the man with the stained chest. "You brought him back!" The whispers and the shouts filled my ears. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block it all out, but it was useless. It was inside my head. And then I heard the man's whisper again, a low, triumphant hiss that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "They're not angry at me," he hissed. "They're angry at you. You brought me here. You should have just kept driving. But you just couldn't resist." The cab suddenly went silent. The static stopped. The lights went back to normal. The whispers were gone. I was alone again. I opened my eyes and looked at the diner. The windows were empty. The sign was normal. The Crossroads Cafe. Again. But I could still feel the cold. I could still hear the whispers. I fumbled with the keys and started the rig. I drove off, speeding down the road, not daring to look back. I drove until the sun came up and the air felt clean again. The Ghost of Blackwood Creek. Part 1: The Long Detour. The road is a living thing, a ribbon of asphalt and concrete that stretches across the country, carrying us, the truckers, on its back. I've been a part of that rhythm for 20 years, and I've seen things, sure, but nothing that ever made me question the nature of reality. The back roads, the shortcuts that only the old-timers know, those are where you find the real stories. That night, I was on my way to Seattle, pushing hard to make a deadline. The main highway was a mess, a pile-up a few miles ahead, and I wasn't about to sit in traffic for hours. I decided to take a detour, a long, winding back road that cut through the deep forests of the Pacific Northwest. It was a beautiful drive, the trees a thick, dark wall on either side of my rig, their branches forming a canopy that swallowed the moonlight. The air was cool and smelled of pine and damp earth. It was quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that doesn't feel peaceful, but heavy, oppressive, as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. My GPS, a brand new Garmin I'd bought for this exact reason, started to glitch. The screen froze, the map a jumbled mess of colors. I tried my CB, but all I got was static, a sound that was starting to feel like a second heartbeat on these lonely roads. I was utterly alone. No other headlights, no other rigs. Just me, my truck, and the miles of forest that stretched on forever. I was beginning to feel a sense of unease, a cold knot in my stomach that had nothing to do with the night air. There was a feeling that something was watching me from the shadows, something that didn't belong to the living. The trees seemed to press in closer, their branches reaching for my rig like long, skeletal fingers. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I told myself it was just the wind. The road twisted and turned, and after what felt like an eternity, I saw a small bridge ahead. A stone bridge, old and covered in moss, crossing a narrow creek. It was a picturesque sight, almost like something out of a fairy tale. But something was wrong. Standing in the middle of the bridge, staring down into the dark water, was a figure. A woman. She was wearing a long, white dress, and her hair was a dark mess, tangled and wet. She was perfectly still, a silent sentinel in the middle of the night. I slammed on the brakes, my rig screeching to a halt just before the bridge. The sound was jarring in the profound silence. She didn't move. She didn't react to the lights of my truck, or the squeal of the tires. She just stood there, her head bowed, staring at her reflection in the water. She was too still to be real. Too perfect. I felt a cold dread settle in my bones. I knew, with a horrifying certainty, that this was no living woman. This was a ghost. My heart was pounding in my chest, a frantic drum against my ribs. I knew I should just put the rig in reverse and get out of there. But I was frozen, mesmerized by the silent figure on the bridge. I had to know what she was. I had to know why she was there. My hands were shaking, and I reached for the radio. I had to get a signal, had to talk to someone. But the radio was still dead. It was just me, my rig, and the silent figure on the bridge. I knew I had to leave. I had to get out of there. But as I reached for the ignition, I saw her move. She slowly turned her head, her face still obscured by her long, dark hair, and she looked up at me. And I knew, with a horrifying certainty, that she was not just a ghost. She was a warning. Part 2: The Bridge of Screams. I was paralyzed. Her head was tilted, her gaze locked on me, even though I couldn't see her face. The silence was so profound it felt like I was in a vacuum. It was broken only by the sound of my own ragged breathing. And then, a sound that chilled me to the bone. A faint, low sound from the creek below the bridge. It wasn't the sound of running water. It was the sound of a woman crying. Not a sob, not a wail, but a quiet, rhythmic, mournful cry. It was coming from the water. It was her voice. It was a sound of unbearable sadness and pain. I felt a cold dread wash over me. I wasn't just looking at a ghost. I was hearing her suffering. My hand was still on the ignition, but I couldn't move. I wanted to start the truck and speed away, but I was frozen in a moment of pure, unadulterated terror. The crying sound from the creek grew louder, more frantic, and then, a scream. A blood-curdling, guttural scream that echoed through the woods and sent a jolt of ice through my veins. It was the sound of someone dying, a sound of agony and despair that had no business existing in the silence of the forest. The woman on the bridge didn't move. She just stood there, her head still bowed, as if she were mourning the sound. And then, she looked up at me again, and her face was no longer obscured by her hair. It was a face of pure horror. Her eyes were wide, white, and empty. Her mouth was a gaping, black hole, twisted into a silent, agonizing scream. Her skin was pale and translucent, and I could see the veins pulsing beneath the surface, a faint, dark web of blue. I finally snapped out of my paralysis. I screamed, a raw, terrified sound, and I slammed my foot on the gas. The engine roared to life, but the truck didn't move. I had forgotten to take it out of park. I fumbled with the gear shift, my hands shaking so hard I could barely grip it. The ghost on the bridge was now moving. She was gliding towards my truck, her feet not touching the ground, her body a silent, terrifying blur. I could feel the cold of her presence, a chill that seeped into the cab and made my bones ache. The screaming from the creek was now a deafening, unceasing shriek, a sound that was tearing through my eardrums and burrowing into my brain. The ghost was at my window now, her face inches from the glass. Her mouth was open in a silent scream, her eyes wide with a terror that was not her own. She was showing me something. She was showing me her last moments. My hand was still on the gear shift, but I was staring at the face of the ghost. And then I saw it. A dark, shadowy figure behind her. A man. His face was obscured by the darkness, but I could see his hands. They were covered in mud and blood. He was holding something. A rock. He was reenacting the last moments of her life. He had killed her. He had thrown her from the bridge into the creek below. The terror on her face was not her own. It was a reflection of her killer's. I was not just seeing a ghost. I was seeing a memory. A horrifying, violent memory. And I was trapped in it. Part 3: The Muddy Handprint. The roar of my engine finally broke the spell. With a final, desperate shove, I slammed the gear shift into drive, and the truck lurched forward. The ghost's face, a mask of silent agony, was a blur as I sped past her. The shadowy figure behind her seemed to scream a soundless curse at me, and I saw his face for a split second. His eyes were pure black, like two holes in the fabric of reality. He was a monster. I sped across the bridge, the wheels of my rig rattling on the old stone, and I didn't dare look in my rearview mirror. I just drove. I drove until the sun came up and the trees gave way to rolling hills and open fields. I drove until the air felt clean again and I could breathe without the ghost's terror filling my lungs. I pulled into a truck stop, my body shaking uncontrollably. I stumbled out of the cab, my legs feeling like they were made of lead. I was safe. I was alive. I was in a well-lit, noisy place with other people. But the ghost's face, the horrifying memory she had shown me, was burned into my mind. I was a professional, a man who had seen it all. But nothing could have prepared me for that. I went to the washroom, splashing cold water on my face, trying to scrub away the lingering sense of dread. When I came back to my rig, I saw something on the side of my cab. A handprint. A small, muddy handprint, just below the driver's side window. My blood ran cold. The mud was dark and smelled of damp earth and rot, the same smell I had smelled on the bridge. I knew, with a horrifying certainty, where the handprint came from. It was hers. It was the ghost's. She had touched my truck. She had left her mark. I tried to wash it off, but the mud wouldn't budge. I scrubbed and scrubbed, but it just smeared, a dark stain that seemed to be a part of the truck now. I looked at the mud, and I saw something glinting in it. A small, rusted locket. It was caked in mud, but I could see a picture inside. A picture of a young woman with a long, dark hair. It was her. The ghost. The picture was faded and old, but her face was clear. She was smiling. A normal, happy smile. The horror of the face she had shown me on the bridge was a terrifying contrast. I was shaking, and I got back in my rig, the locket clenched in my hand. I drove away from the truck stop, not daring to look back. I never went back to that bridge. I never drove that detour again. I threw the locket into a dumpster, but I knew it wouldn't be enough. The ghost had a part of me now. She had left a mark on my truck, and she had left a mark on my soul. I can't drive past the creek now without feeling a cold dread, and I can't look at my truck's window without seeing her face. The ghost of Blackwood Creek left a stain on my life, a constant reminder that some roads are not meant to be traveled. The longest tunnel. Part 1. The descent into darkness. The road can be a ribbon of asphalt and concrete that stretches across the country, but it can also be a long, dark tunnel. My rig was a second home, a place of comfort and predictability. I've been a professional for over 20 years, and I've seen it all. I've driven through every kind of weather, from blizzards that swallow the headlights to deserts so hot the asphalt breathes. But I'd never driven through a tunnel that felt like it had a mind of its own. I was on a route I'd driven a dozen times, a straight shot through a mountain range. There was a long tunnel, a well-known landmark, but it was just a part of the road. That night, though, it felt different. The air was heavy and still, the kind of quiet that feels like a weight on your chest. I was listening to the constant rumble of my engine, the hum of the tires on the pavement, a familiar rhythm that was my constant companion. As I approached the tunnel, the mountain loomed over me, a dark and imposing presence. The entrance to the tunnel was just a black hole in the mountain, a mouth waiting to swallow me whole. My headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the gray, concrete walls. I drove in, and the world outside vanished. The air became cold, and the sound of my engine changed. The sound of the tires on the asphalt was gone, replaced by a strange, hollow echo that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The tunnel was long, but it wasn't endless. I knew the length, the distance, the time it would take to get through. But a feeling of dread started to creep in, a cold, sickening feeling in the pit of my stomach. The tunnel felt longer than it should have. I checked my GPS, but the screen was black, a dead void of nothingness. My CB radio was just a wall of static. I was completely alone in the darkness. The only sound was the hollow echo of my engine and the strange, metallic dripping sound that seemed to come from the walls. Drip, drip, drip. It was a constant, monotonous sound that was slowly driving me insane. I glanced at my dashboard, and a feeling of pure terror washed over me. The speedometer was at 0. The engine was off. I was moving, but the engine was silent. I was a ghost, a silent rig gliding through a tunnel that had no end. I slammed on the brakes, and the truck skidded to a halt, the sound a jarring, screeching noise that echoed down the tunnel. The silence was absolute. The dripping sound was gone. The only sound was my own ragged breathing. I sat there, my heart pounding in my chest, and I looked into my rearview mirror. And that's when I saw it. A light. A single, faint, red light in the far distance, coming towards me. It was too far away to be a car. It was just a point of red light, a single, glowing orb in the darkness. It was moving impossibly fast, and it was getting closer. The light seemed to pulse with a low, rhythmic beat, a slow throb that echoed in my chest. My hands were shaking, and I fumbled for the keys, trying to start the engine. Nothing. The engine was dead. The truck was a mausoleum. The light was closer now, and I could hear something. A sound like a distant, low, moaning sound. It was the sound of 1,000 voices moaning in unison, a sound of unbearable pain and suffering. The light was a beacon of torment, and it was coming for me. I was trapped. I was in a tunnel that had no beginning and no end. And I was not alone. Part 2: The Silent Passenger. The red light was closer now, and the moaning was a low, chilling chorus that filled the tunnel. It was a sound of pure agony, 1,000 voices lost in a void of endless despair. The light was growing brighter, and I could see shapes in it now. Dark, shadowy figures, their forms distorted and writhing, as if they were trapped in the light. They were souls, a chorus of ghosts trapped in the light, and they were trying to get out. My body was shaking uncontrollably, and I tried to start the engine again, my hands trembling on the keys. Nothing. The truck was dead. I was a sitting duck, a feast for the darkness. The red light was now a beacon of pure malice, and the moaning was a symphony of torment. I looked at the passenger seat beside me, and I saw a shape. It was a faint, shadowy figure, a blurred outline of a man, thin and gaunt, his eyes two hollow, black pits. It was a ghost. A passenger. He was sitting there, his head tilted to the side, his body a transparent shadow against the darkness. He wasn't moving. He was just sitting there, waiting. My blood ran cold. The moaning from the light was closer now, and I could hear it more clearly. The voices were all saying the same thing. "Give him to us! Give him to us!" They chanted. They weren't coming for me. They were coming for him. The passenger. The ghost. He was the reason I was here. He was the one they wanted. I felt a cold hand on my arm. The ghost in the passenger seat. His hand was translucent, but it was cold, a deep, bone-chilling cold that made me gasp. He pointed to the back of the truck, to the cargo. He had something in his hands. A small, black box. It was a lockbox, a heavy, steel container. He was pointing to it, as if he wanted me to open it. And then he spoke. His voice was a low, dry whisper, a sound like dead leaves scraping against the pavement. "They want the box," he whispered. "They want what's inside. Give it to them. And you can leave." I was shaking, and I looked at the box. What was inside? I had no idea. But I knew that whatever it was important. It was the reason I was trapped here. It was the reason the dead were calling. The red light was right behind my truck now, a blinding, pulsating beacon of torment. The moaning was deafening, a chorus of 1,000 voices screaming for release. I could feel the heat of the light, an oppressive, suffocating heat that was slowly baking me alive. The ghost in the passenger seat was now a solid presence, his face a gaunt, skeletal mask. He was smiling. A cold, cruel, triumphant smile. "Give it to them," he whispered, his voice a low hiss. "Give it to them, and you can live. Or keep it and join us. Forever." My mind was screaming. I had to choose. I had to decide. My life depended on it. I was in a tunnel that had no end. And I was trapped between a silent passenger and a legion of screaming ghosts. Part 3: The End of the Line. I slammed my hand on the passenger seat, a frantic, desperate attempt to hit the ghost. But my hand went right through him. He was a phantom, a living memory. "I'm not giving you anything!" I screamed. "I'm not staying here! I'm getting out!" The ghost in the passenger seat laughed, a cold, rattling sound that was devoid of any humor. "You can't leave," he whispered. "The tunnel has a mind of its own. It won't let you go." You're a part of it now. You're our new driver. For eternity. My heart was in my throat, and I looked at the black box on the seat beside him. I had a choice. I could give them the box, give them what they wanted, and walk away. Or I could keep it, and become one of them. A part of the legion of lost souls in the red light. I was not going to die here. I was not going to give them what they wanted. I was going to fight. I reached for the ignition, my hand shaking, and I twisted the key with all my might. The engine sputtered, groaned, and then roared to life. The sound was a deafening, beautiful blast that filled the tunnel, a roar that was a defiant scream in the face of the darkness. The ghost in the passenger's seat hissed in surprise, his form flickering. The red light behind me, the chorus of moaning ghosts, seemed to recoil from the sound. I slammed the truck into drive and peeled out of there, speeding down the tunnel, the roar of my engine a constant, triumphant symphony. I didn't stop. I didn't look in my rearview mirror. I just drove. I drove until I saw a pinprick of light in the distance. The end of the tunnel. I burst out of the darkness and into the sun. The air was fresh and clean, the world was normal again. The light was just sunlight, the sound was just the hum of the road. I was out. I was free. I pulled into a rest stop, my body shaking, and I stumbled out of the cab. I looked back at the tunnel, and it was just a dark hole in the mountain. Nothing special. Nothing terrifying. But I knew better. I looked at the passenger seat beside me, and the ghost was gone. The black box was gone too. It wasn't there. It had never been there. It was all in my mind. The horror had been a figment of my imagination, a product of exhaustion and fear. I was relieved, but a sense of unease still lingered. I had fought a ghost, a demon, a legion of the damned, and I had won. But I was not the same. I had driven through a tunnel that had a life of its own, and it had left a part of itself in me. I am a different person now. I can still hear the moaning on the quiet, lonely roads. I can still feel the cold touch of a hand on my arm. I can still see the red light in my rearview mirror. The tunnel is a part of me now. And I know, deep down, that the tunnel isn't the only one with a mind of its own. He walked with me. Part 1: The Lonesome Route and the Rhythmic Stride. The road to eastern Oklahoma is a mystical thing. It's a place of low, rolling hills, small creeks, and a profound loneliness that can be as comforting as it is overwhelming. I've been driving my rig for 20 years. I know every mile of that interstate, every rest stop, every diner, and every shortcut. The loneliness of the road was my peace. It was just the deep, steady rumble of the engine, the hushed whisper of the tires on the asphalt, and the vast, black darkness that seemed to breathe all around me. That night, the peace was even more profound than usual. It was the kind of silence that settles in after a thunderstorm, where the air is clean and everything feels sharper, more real, more aware. I was hauling a heavy load, a last-minute delivery to a town on the Arkansas border. My dispatcher had called it an easy run, a straight shot through the heart of the forest. The only thing that stood between me and my destination was a long, solitary two-lane road that felt like a secret. A road where the only companions were the rustling leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. It was exactly the kind of quiet I had come to love. But that peaceful rhythm was broken. My CB radio was dead. Not static, not crackle, just a profound, empty silence. I tried dozens of channels, but the only thing I could get was a wall of dead air. And strangely, even with the radio off, I could hear a sound. A sound that was not the engine, not the tires. It was the distinct sound of footsteps. It wasn't a loud sound, it was a rhythmic, steady thump, 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 a sound of heavy boots walking on asphalt. At first, I convinced myself it was just my imagination, a trick of the mind born from exhaustion and the overwhelming darkness. I was alone on the road for miles. There was no one out there to make that sound. I checked my mirrors. The only thing behind me was my own rig's shadow, a giant, distorted figure in the darkness, trailing me like a silent ghost. And still, the sound continued. The sound of boots walking on the asphalt. My heart began to beat faster, a frantic drum that I could feel pounding in my chest. I tried to calm myself, to rationalize. Maybe it was an echo from the engine, a strange, new noise that I had never noticed before. But I knew it wasn't. The sound was too clear, too distinct. It was the undeniable sound of someone walking. And what was even more terrifying, it was the sound of someone walking at the exact same pace as my rig. I was doing 50 miles an hour. No human could be keeping up with me. But the sound continued, a step, a step, a step. It was a methodical rhythm, a beat that was slowly driving me insane. I felt a cold knot of dread form in the pit of my stomach. The road had stopped being a peaceful sanctuary and had become a stage for a slow, terrifying performance. I sped up, pressing the gas pedal to the floor, and the sound sped up too. The cadence of the footsteps increased, the rhythm becoming faster. He was keeping up with me. He was out there, in the middle of the darkness, running right alongside my truck. I felt a cold, unshakable dread seep into me. I was a man of logic and reason, a man who believed in what he could see and touch. But this was something else entirely. This was a nightmare made real, a phantom that was defying all laws of physics. My hands were white-knuckled on the steering wheel, and I found myself looking at my side mirror, my gaze glued to it, as if I knew what I was about to see. And that's when I saw him. A figure. A tall, gaunt figure, running effortlessly alongside my truck. He wasn't human. His skin was gray, almost translucent, and his eyes were two empty, black holes in the darkness. His arms were long and skeletal, and he was running with a horrifying, toothless grin. He was looking at me. He was laughing. And he was keeping pace with me. I screamed, a raw, terrified sound that was lost in the roar of the engine. I sped up even more, my truck shaking, the engine screaming. But he didn't fall behind. He kept running alongside me, a tireless runner, a phantom of the road. I was in a race for my life, and the finish line wasn't the town on the border, but the sun, the daylight that I hoped would make him disappear. I was a professional, a man who had seen it all, but this was a horror that was chasing me, a horror that was a part of the road now. It was a creature from another dimension, a thing that was a part of the asphalt and the darkness, and it had chosen me as its next victim. The sound of his footsteps was now a constant, frantic drum, a beat that was a terrifying symphony of my own fear. He was a tireless phantom, a ghost of the road, and I was trapped. The fear was a physical thing, a cold weight on my chest that made it hard to breathe. I was no longer a driver. I was a passenger in my own rig, and he was my tormentor. I slammed the gas pedal to the floor, the speedometer needle climbing higher and higher, the engine screaming in protest. But he was still there. He was still running. His long, skeletal legs a blur, his horrifying grin a constant in my side mirror. He was a part of my reality now, a part of my consciousness. He had found me, and he wasn't going to let me go. I knew, with a horrifying certainty, that I wasn't going to win this race. He was faster. He was stronger. He was a force of nature, a part of the darkness itself, and I was just a man in a truck. The sound of his footsteps was now a relentless pounding in my ears, a sound that was slowly driving me insane. He was a predator, and I was his prey, and he was enjoying the hunt. He was a specter of the road, and he was walking with me. Part 2: The Icy Touch and the Phantom's Fury. My heart was in a state of pure panic. I was doing over 100 miles an hour, and the figure was still right beside me, running effortlessly. His long arms swung in sync with my truck, and the cadence of his boots was a terrifying rhythm that was slowly driving me insane. I couldn't think, I couldn't breathe, I could only focus on one thing: the road. The road ahead of me, the darkness that stretched out endlessly. He was there, and I couldn't outrun him. I was trapped. I was a passenger in my own escape, and he was my tormentor. My rig, which had always been a sanctuary, now felt like a coffin. I was in a small, enclosed space, hurtling through the darkness with a monster as my companion. The feeling of helplessness was a new kind of terror, a terror that went beyond the physical, a terror that was seeping into my very soul. The side mirror of my truck was my only view of him, and I couldn't stop looking. His grin was a horrifying thing, a grin of pure malevolence. His empty eyes seemed to see right through me, into my soul. And he was laughing. I could hear his laughter, a sound that was not a sound. It was a whisper, a dry rasp that was transmitted directly into my brain, bypassing my ears. It was a sound of delight, a sound of pure amusement. He was enjoying it. He was having fun with my terror. He was not just a ghost or a creature. He was a parasite, feeding on my fear, growing stronger with every beat of my terrified heart. He was an ancient thing, a thing that had been waiting for a lonely driver on a dark road, a thing that had finally found its prey. I started to scream, my voice becoming a raw, desperate sound that echoed inside the cab. I pounded on the steering wheel, I hit the dashboard, hoping the noise would scare him off, would make him disappear. But it didn't. He kept running, a tireless phantom. His laughter became louder, clearer, a sound of pure delight. He knew I was scared. He knew I was in a state of panic. He had found me, and he wasn't going to let me go. I tried to turn my rig, to swerve, to get away from him, but the road was straight, and he was too fast. He was a part of the road now, a part of the darkness, and he was with me, always with me. I tried to turn on my CB radio, hoping the voice of another driver, the voice of another human, would make him disappear. But the radio was dead. The static was a constant hum, a wall of noise that seemed to separate me even further from the real world. And then I heard a voice. It wasn't a trucker's voice. It was his voice. A dry, empty voice that seemed to be coming from inside my head. "I saw you," the voice hissed. "I saw you on the road. You're alone. You're lost. I saw you and I chose you. And now you will walk with me." I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach, a cold dread that went deeper than anything I had ever felt before. He was inside my head. He was in my mind. He was a part of me now. His hand, a long, skeletal hand, reached out and grabbed my side mirror. My breath caught in my throat. The mirror began to crack. The sound of cracking was a sound of torture, a sound of shattering glass, a sound that made me feel like my mind was breaking. The figure in the mirror grinned. His hand was a closed fist, and the mirror was shattering. I was trapped. I couldn't look at him. But I couldn't stop looking at his hand, the hand that was slowly pulling me into the abyss, into his world. The 100-mile-an-hour race was no longer an escape. It was a delivery. I was the cargo, and he was my driver. And our destination wasn't a town. It was something far, far worse. The mirror exploded in a shower of shards. The sound was deafening, a sound of shattering glass that echoed in the cab and in my mind. The non-human figure was no longer on the outside of the truck. I felt a chill run down my spine. He was inside. I looked at the passenger seat. He was sitting there, his form translucent, his long, thin legs bent in an unnatural way, his empty eyes watching me. His grin was even more horrifying up close, a grin of triumph, of pure malice. His presence was cold, a cold that seeped into my skin and reached my bones. I was no longer alone. I was no longer running. I was trapped with my pursuer. The feeling of dread was so intense, I could taste it. It was a metallic, coppery taste, a taste of fear. The fear paralyzed me. I tried to move, but my body wouldn't obey. I was frozen in panic, my heart beating so hard I thought it would explode. He reached out, his long, skeletal hand moving slowly towards me. I tried to scream, but my voice wouldn't come out. He wasn't trying to attack me. He was trying to touch me. His hand reached out and touched my shoulder. The touch was a shock. A shock of cold that made me feel like my body was on fire. It was a cold that burned me, a cold that was freezing me from the inside out. I felt my skin crawl, my muscles contract. I felt like I was slowly becoming a statue of ice. I could feel my life force, my very soul, being sucked out of me, a cold, empty feeling that was a new kind of terror. His voice, the dry whisper, came from inside my head, not from his lips. "You're cold," the voice hissed, with a tone of delight. "You're becoming like me." I felt a new wave of terror. He wasn't killing me. He was transforming me. He was making me like him. I wouldn't just be a victim. I would be a new phantom, a new being who walked with the darkness. I was in a state of panic. I was dying, but it wasn't a death of flesh and bone. It was a death of soul. My soul was being sucked out of me, out of my life, into his world. He was a spiritual vampire, and I was his next meal. I was a vessel, a new host for the darkness, and I was being drained of my life, of my reality. I closed my eyes. I focused on everything that was mine. On my wife, on my children, on my life. I gripped the steering wheel with all my might, my knuckles white. I screamed in my mind, a silent scream, a scream of rage and despair. I was not going to let him take me. I was not going to become a phantom of the road. I was a man. I was a driver. I was real. My life was real. My anger was real. And my fear was my weapon. I used my fear to fight. I used my fear to break his hold on me. I opened my eyes. His hand was still on my shoulder, but his grin was gone. His face was one of pure surprise. He didn't expect me to fight. He didn't expect me to fight back. He underestimated me. The horror had a name, and I was not going to give in. Part 3: The Morning Sun and the Lingering Shadow. The surprise on his face lasted for only an instant. The grin returned, even wider, more malevolent. He was no longer surprised. He was angry. "You're stronger than I thought." His voice hissed in my mind, now with a tone of fury and hatred. But not strong enough. He removed his hand from my shoulder, and I felt my soul recede back into my body, a momentary relief. But he wasn't done. He moved, not like a living thing, but like a wisp of smoke, and he settled on top of the dashboard of my truck, looking down at me. He was on his knees, his long, skeletal arms dangling, his horrifying, empty grin now above my head. He was looking down on me, a predator looking at his prey. He was a demon of the road, and I was his plaything. His anger was a shiver in the air, a shiver that made me tremble. The cab of my truck, which was once my sanctuary, was now my prison. He couldn't touch me, but he could scare me. He could break me. He could drive me insane. And he was trying. I closed my eyes and I floored it. I no longer cared about speed. I no longer cared about the road. I just wanted to get away. I just wanted him to be gone. I was driving toward the light, toward the sunrise, toward the hope that the sun would make him disappear. My hope was the only thing I had left, and I was clinging to it with every fiber of my being. His laughter, the dry whisper, filled the cab, a sound of pure delight. He was having fun with my panic. I opened my eyes, and I looked at him. And I saw him. He wasn't just a ghost. He was a memory. I saw his story in his empty eyes. He was a trucker. He was lost. He was alone. And he had made a mistake. A mistake that trapped him on the road. A mistake that turned him into what he was. I saw his story of pain and despair. I saw his loneliness. And I saw his envy. He didn't want to kill me. He wanted to have me. He wanted to have me as a companion, a new phantom to walk with him, to share his curse. He was a lonely soul, and his loneliness was a monster that was consuming him, and he wanted to share that monstrous loneliness with me. I understood. I understood what he wanted. And I used that knowledge as my weapon. "You don't want me," I said, my voice hoarse but steady. "You're lonely. You're scared. You're angry. And you're trapped. But I'm not. I have a home. I have a family. I have a life. I am not alone. And you are." His laughter stopped. His grin disappeared. He was silent, looking at me. His face was a mask of hatred and pain. I had hit him. I had hit his weak spot. And he became violent. He moved not to attack me, but to the steering wheel. His long, skeletal hands grabbed the wheel, and he spun it with a supernatural force. My truck swerved off the road, going into an uncontrollable tailspin. I was trapped. I was dying. And he was laughing. He had lost his mind to loneliness, and he was taking me with him. My life flashed before my eyes. My wife, my children, my home. I couldn't die. I couldn't leave my life behind. I fought. I fought for every single one of them. My hands gripped the steering wheel, fighting his control, but his strength was supernatural. The truck continued to slide off the road, towards the dark forest. His laughter was a sound of triumph, a sound of pure delight. He was taking me to his world, to the world of the road ghosts. I knew my only chance was the sun. I looked to the east, and I saw it. A faint, white glow on the horizon. The sun was rising. My heart was a frantic drum, a rhythm of hope that was stronger than his laughter. I screamed, not from fear, but from rage. "I'm not going with you!" I yelled, and I used all my strength to fight against his control of the wheel. His laughter turned into a sound of shock, a sound of surprise. He didn't expect me to fight to the very end. He underestimated me. I spun the wheel with a force I didn't know I had, and the truck straightened out. He grabbed at me, his smoky form becoming more solid, his hands grabbing me, his voice hissing in my ears. But I didn't hear him. I focused on the light. I focused on the sunrise. And he saw that he was losing the battle. The light was becoming stronger. The darkness was receding. And he was becoming weaker. He was a creature of the dark, and the light was his enemy. He screamed, a scream of rage and despair, and he let go of the steering wheel. His form became translucent, and he became a wisp of smoke. He tried to touch me, but the light of the sun kept him at bay. He was screaming, a sound of pure hatred, a sound of a lost soul that didn't want to be alone. And he disappeared. His smoky form dissipated, and I was alone again. I was alone on the road, my truck stopping on the side of a hill, and the light of the sun was hitting my face. I was free. I was alive. I had survived. The horror was gone. I didn't go home. I couldn't. I had seen something that changed me. I had fought a phantom of the road, and I had won. But I knew that my victory was only temporary. I sold my truck. I couldn't drive anymore. I got rid of my CB radio. I couldn't listen to the static anymore. I now work in a warehouse, stacking boxes, living a normal life. But on cold, lonely nights, I can still hear the sound of footsteps on the asphalt. I still turn around, and I still see my shadow, a tall, gaunt figure that follows me. I'm not on the road anymore. But the road is still in me. And I know, deep down in my soul, that somewhere on a dark road in Oklahoma, there is a figure of dust and wind, waiting for a new driver to keep him company. My life is a constant reminder that some horrors are not forgotten, but are merely waiting for a chance to walk with you again.